welcome to the deep dive. You've handed us a highly polarized, incredibly dense text today, and we are thrilled to have you with us as we unpack it.
Absolutely. It is a massive read.
It really is. Now, before we jump into the architecture of today's source material, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the show. It genuinely helps us keep bringing you these comprehensive, cover-to-cover breakdowns.
It makes a huge difference, yeah.
So today, we are undertaking a massive review of a newly published ebook. And I want to mention right at the top, if you find today's discussion intriguing and want to read the source material for yourself, check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy it. You can also follow the author at the handle at Conrad N. Riker on Substack.
That is exactly right. The book we are unpacking today is called Critical Cringe, Feminist Word Games Exposed and Mocked by Sophie Marie Eve Riker.
Quite a title.
Right, it sets the tone immediately. To give you the immediate context on what you are about to hear, this book is expressly written for a men's rights and what you would call a manosphere audience.
Which is a very specific demographic.
Yes, and the entire foundational premise of the text is built on the assertion that modern institutions ranging from academia and the legacy media to family courts and the medical establishment have been comprehensively captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
So we need to set some very strict ground rules for our deep dive today because we are dealing with a text designed to be provocative. This is a highly polarized and politically charged book.
Highly charged.
Our job today isn't to take sides. We aren't here to agree or disagree with the author. We are here as your impartial guides to unpack the specific arguments, the statistics, the anecdotes, and the historical claims the author uses to build her case.
We're just looking at the blueprints.
Exactly. The goal is for you to understand exactly what this book is saying, how it constructs its worldview, and the specific rhetoric it employs. We are acting solely as reporters dissecting the text.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood in its full, unvarnished context. Whether you happen to align with the author's worldview or whether you are diametrically opposed to it, understanding the specific mechanics of her arguments is crucial if you want to understand the current cultural and political landscape.
I couldn't agree more.
The author is presenting what amounts to a modern manifesto, and we are going to walk you through exactly how she constructs it, chapter by chapter, claim by claim.
Let's start right at the beginning, where she pulls the pin. The author actually uses that exact metaphor in her introduction. She describes this book as a grenade meant to explode the long-held cultural narrative that feminism is fundamentally about equality.
She doesn't ease into it.
Not at all. The core argument she presents right out of the gate is that feminism was never about equality. It is, in her exact words, a shakedown for power.
A shake. Right. And she builds this argument by contrasting where women demand equality versus where they are notably silent. She points out that society hears endless demands for equal female representation in cushy corporate boardrooms and political offices.
But absolute silence when it comes to representation in coal mines, sewage treatment plants, or the military draft.
Exactly. If we look at the rhetorical strategy she is deploying here, it's quite calculated. Riker immediately frames human history as a ledger of male sacrifice. She argues that men physically built civilization, and she doesn't just make a broad statement, she specifically points to the grueling, lethal labor of digging the trenches in World War I.
The mud and the blood.
Right, and erecting the steel skeletons of early skyscrapers without safety harnesses. She brings up the men building the high-voltage power grids that electrify the modern world.
So by front-loading the book with these intense images of male physical labor and sacrifice, she sets up her claim that men are now being vilified by modern institutions simply for existing.
After having built the very infrastructure those institutions rely on.
And that framing sets the stage for her first major historical deconstruction, a chapter she titles The Matriarchal Mirage.
This was a fascinating pivot.
She goes directly after the concept that idyllic, peaceful, matriarchal societies ever existed in human prehistory. You hear this idea sometimes in popular culture, this notion of ancient goddess-worshipping utopias before the patriarchy took over. Riker attempts to completely dismantle that.
She brings in data to back this up. The text cites a 2019 Stanford study that reviewed 1,200 different cultures throughout history.
1,200.
According to the book, that massive anthropological study found exactly 0 examples of female-only governance.
0.
None. She even uses a bit of observational humor regarding primate biology, noting that even bonobos, which are often cited as peaceful, female-led primates, still have alpha males intricately involved in their social hierarchies.
And she doesn't stop with broad studies. She targets specific, famous anthropologists. The book goes after Margaret Mead, claiming her famous accounts of Samoan free love paradises were completely debunked.
Yes, the author states that Mead's teenage interviewees later admitted to essentially trolling her.
Just making up stories to tell the Western researcher what she wanted to hear.
Right. Riker also, by establishing this narrative, she attempts to strip away the assumed moral high ground of the movement before moving on to her most controversial historical revision.
Yes, and this is where she targets the suffragettes. Chapter 2 is entirely dedicated to reframing the early British suffragettes. She doesn't view them as heroes of democracy.
The book explicitly labels them as domestic terrorists.
She completely goes after the legacy of Emmeline Pankhurst and her famous Deeds Not Words campaign. The author claims that modern history, specifically in the education system, has completely erased the fact that suffragettes targeted public infrastructure.
The book lists theaters and churches being targeted,
and specifically details the bombing of a pavilion at the Glasgow Botanic Gardens. She even mentions a bombing at Westminster Abbey that allegedly injured young choir boys.
The level of detail she uses here is meant to shock the reader out of their preconceived notions. She recounts the story of a man named Alfred Danks.
Right, the flower seller.
Yes. According to a 1912 report in the Times that Riker cites, Danks was a working-class flower seller. He was allegedly approached by suffragettes demanding a donation. When he refused to give up his day's earnings, the book states he was beaten by the women with iron-tipped placards so severely that he required 14 stitches.
14 stitches for a working-class guy just trying to make a living.
Riker uses this specific, granular anecdote to connect historical violence to modern activism. She argues that today's activists who glue their hands to highways or vandalize famous artwork are just following the original suffragette playbook,
which she defines as using vandalism, intimidation, and chaos to extort concessions from a polite society. She is so adamant about this reframing that she actually demands movies like the 2015 film Suffragette be culturally canceled for whitewashing what she considers to be terrorism.
But the ultimate conclusion she draws on the voting rights issue is a massive counter-narrative to what is traditionally taught. She argues that these violent tactics didn't secure the vote.
She says they actually delayed voting rights by alienating the public and lawmakers.
Furthermore, she points out a stark, highly specific statistic to challenge the idea of targeted female oppression. She notes that by 1918, the year women gained the vote in Britain, 40% of British men still legally couldn't vote due to property and class restrictions.
This is a crucial load-bearing pillar of her historical argument. She juxtaposes the suffragettes' demands in London with the 5 million young working-class men who were drafted and sent to die in the mud of Flanders fields during World War I.
She argues that the true ultimate disenfranchisement and sacrifice was entirely male, while the narrative of oppression was co-opted by wealthy, property-owning women.
If you are following the architecture of her argument here, Riker is systematically trying to dismantle the foundational myths of the feminist movement. By attacking the suffragettes, she is telling her reader that the entire history of women's liberation is built on extortion and historical revisionism.
Not actual moral progress.
And that historical revisionism acts as the bedrock for Section 2 of her book, where she transitions from history into the modern, highly contested battlegrounds of law and medicine.
If she believes the historical narrative is a mirage, her next target is how modern institutions codify that mirage into law.
And she starts with perhaps the most polarizing topic imaginable: abortion.
Riker frames abortion completely outside the realm of standard healthcare. She describes the entire practice as a massive corporate hustle and an industrial complex.
The book cites Planned Parenthood's reported $1.7 billion revenue to underscore this point.
To support this framing of a profit-driven industry, the author relies heavily on the testimony of Abby Johnson, a former Planned Parenthood clinic director who famously turned into a pro-life whistleblower.
Right. According to the text, Johnson claims that clinics were incentivized to upsell abortions to vulnerable women in the exact same manner a salesman would upsell a used car.
The author contrasts this modern, highly lucrative medical industry with ancient legal texts. She specifically cites Exodus 21 from the Bible, pointing out that ancient laws impose strict fines for harming unborn life, recognizing it as valuable.
She uses this to argue that modern society has completely inverted justice by commodifying fetal tissue. She brings up a heavily debated, scrubbed TikTok video from a California nurse who was allegedly discussing the wild profit margins of selling fetal tissue to biotech labs.
Now, whether one accepts these claims at face value or not, the author's intent is crystal clear. She is trying to rebrand the pro-choice movement.
She doesn't frame it as bodily autonomy, but as a taxpayer-funded eugenics program that is heavily backed by massive pharmaceutical giants like Pfizer.
So how does she tie this back to the men's rights focus of the book? This is where she introduces the concept of paper abortion.
Yes, paper abortions.
Riker cites a 2023 Swedish pilot program that explored the idea of allowing men to legally opt out of parental rights and financial responsibilities pre-birth during the early stages of a pregnancy.
Let's break down exactly what she means by a paper abortion, because it's a core concept for her audience. The argument goes like this. If a woman becomes pregnant, feminism demands she has 100% bodily autonomy to decide whether to carry that child to term.
However, if she chooses to keep the child, the man, even if he explicitly stated he did not want to be a father, is legally mandated to provide 18 years of child support.
Riker argues this is a profound hypocrisy. She asserts that feminism demands total freedom of choice for women, but demands 100% forced physical liability from men.
The paper abortion would theoretically allow a man to sign a legal document early in the pregnancy severing all rights and financial obligations, matching the woman's right to opt out.
This exploration of financial liability leads seamlessly into her searing critique of the family court system, a chapter she aggressively titles Divorce Court Gulags.
Gulags. She does not hold back on the terminology.
The author argues that the modern legal system is engineered from the ground up to facilitate what she calls state-sponsored cuckoldry and wealth extraction.
To illustrate this, she uses the story of a man named John. Let's look at the story of John as the book presents it. He's an Alaskan oil rig worker.
The text paints a picture of him working grueling 84-hour weeks in sub-zero temperatures, destroying his body in one of the most dangerous professions on earth.
And the author outlines exactly where his paycheck goes. According to the book, John pays $15,000 a month in alimony to his ex-wife.
$15,000 a month. And where is she? The book claims she uses that extracted wealth to fund luxury yoga retreats in Bali with her new fitness instructor boyfriend.
It's an anecdote deliberately designed to elicit visceral outrage from her target demographic. But she layers very specific sociological and evolutionary statistics over these emotional stories.
She cites a Stanford University statistic claiming that women initiate roughly 70% of all divorces.
To explain why this happens, she turns to evolutionary psychology, specifically referencing Jeffrey Miller's book, The Mating Mind.
Right, she uses Miller's work to argue that women utilize a dual mating strategy. The theory she presents is that, biologically, women are driven to secure a reliable beta provider for long-term resources and stability,
while simultaneously seeking out genetically superior, physically dominant alpha lovers for reproduction.
Riker argues that feminism didn't invent this biological game. She views it as primal human nature. But she asserts that the modern legal system, specifically no-fault divorce and lifetime alimony, has industrialized this strategy.
It allows a woman to extract the resources of the provider through the courts while pursuing her desires elsewhere, completely risk-free.
And her proposed policy fix for this is radical. Riker demands mandatory DNA paternity testing at birth for all children in every hospital with absolutely no exceptions.
He states statistics claiming there is a 1 to 3% cuckoldry rate in modern society, meaning up to 3% of fathers are unknowingly raising, loving, and financially supporting children that are not biologically theirs.
She notes that feminist commentators often dismiss a 1 to 3% rate as a trivial, insignificant number, but Riker frames it entirely differently.
She frames this as ultimate genetic fraud and reproductive theft. She actually compares the modern family court system to the draconian executions of adulterers by King Henry VIII.
Her argument is that the betrayal is the exact same, but modern men are simply bled dry financially over decades, instead of facing literal execution. It's a striking comparison meant to elevate the severity of paternity fraud to the highest possible level of societal betrayal.
If she believes the family courts are economically draining men, her next target is how she believes academic institutions are draining their reputations and futures.
And that is where she brings Title IX's university tribunals into the crosshairs. The book claims that campus Title IX offices operate as feminist-run star chambers.
Let's define what she means by a star chamber. She's referencing the historical, secret English courts that operated without standard due process or juries, used to enforce arbitrary power.
Riker claims modern campus tribunals operate the exact same way, finding an astonishing 83% of accused men guilty without requiring actual verifiable proof.
She brings up very high-profile, documented cases to support this assertion. She details the story of Brian Banks, a rising high school football star with NFL prospects who served 5 years in a maximum security prison on a false rape accusation.
Only for his accuser to later be caught on tape, admitting she fabricated the entire story to secure a massive payout from the school district.
She also highlights the infamous Duke lacrosse team case, where multiple young men had their lives, reputations, and educational prospects ruined by fabricated stories heavily pushed by the media and activist faculty.
Despite definitive DNA evidence clearing the men almost immediately.
This raises an important question about how the author views the modern concept of due process. She viciously attacks the "believe all women" mantra.
She doesn't see it as a supportive slogan for survivors. She views it as the weaponization of tears meant to entirely bypass legal evidence and the presumption of innocence.
She references Emma Solkovich at Columbia University, widely known in the media as the mattress girl.
Solkovich carried a mattress around campus for a year as a senior thesis art project to protest the university clearing the man she accused of assault.
Riker argues that performance art and what she calls victimhood Oscars have replaced actual, rigorous legal investigation.
The author's demand here is severe. She insists that false accusers face mandatory felony charges with equivalent prison time to the crime they alleged.
And that University Title IX star chambers be completely abolished, moving all allegations to actual police departments.
Following the heavy legal arguments surrounding Title IX, we hit a chapter that is highly specific and quite unexpected in its intensity. The chapter is titled The Phallic Phobia Epidemic.
And it is entirely focused on the medical practice of male circumcision.
This chapter is incredibly graphic and pointed. The author paints routine infant circumcision as a horrific violation of male bodily autonomy, one that feminist activists who usually champion bodily autonomy conveniently ignore or even mock.
She claims that hospitals in blue states routinely harvest and sell severed infant foreskins to biotech companies for a 3,300% markup.
And what are they doing with it? According to the book, they use the neonatal fibroblasts to manufacture high-end anti-aging face creams heavily marketed to women.
The rhetoric she uses here is incredibly sharp and designed to point out hypocrisy. She mocks the idea of affluent women demanding organic, cruelty-free food while willingly using expensive cosmetics derived from the harvested genital tissue of baby boys.
She expands the scope globally, mentioning a $100 million hygiene vacation industry in South Korea that heavily markets genital cutting to American parents.
Riker even highlights an art installation by a German artist named Tim Bengel, which was constructed from 10,000 actual surgical circumcision clamps to visualize the sheer industrial scale of the practice.
And what does she propose to do about this? She introduces a concept she calls foreskin reparations.
She actively urges young men to pursue class action lawsuits against the hospitals that perform the procedures for tissue theft and unauthorized bioharvesting.
She argues that if feminists truly believed in the mantra, "my body, my choice," they would be outside hospitals protecting baby boys from genital mutilation with the exact same fervor and funding they use to defend abortion access.
If we pull back and look at the structure of the book so far, we've gone from the historical revisionism of suffragette bombings to the modern battlegrounds of family court, Title IXs, and circumcision.
In Section 3, the author attempts to synthesize all of these seemingly disparate topics under the massive umbrella of economics and Marxist theory.
Riker asserts that modern feminism and Marxist ideology are not just aligned, they are deeply, inextricably intertwined.
The core argument she makes here is that traditional Marxism failed to incite the working class to rise up against the wealthy, so the ideology had to adapt.
She argues that the new goal of these interconnected movements was to replace Marxist class warfare with gender warfare.
By convincing women they are an oppressed class and men are the bourgeois oppressors, the ideological engine keeps running.
She provides detailed examples of how she believes this ideological capture has completely taken over North American academia. The book dedicates significant time to the 2017 incident at Evergreen State College involving evolutionary biology professor Brett Weinstein.
Let's walk through the Evergreen incident as she presents it, because it's vital to her point about academic capture. The college had an annual tradition called the Day of Absence, where minority students would voluntarily leave campus to highlight their contributions.
But in 2017, the organizers inverted it, explicitly asking all white staff and students to leave the campus for the day.
Brett Weinstein, a lifelong progressive, objected to this on the grounds that asking any racial group to leave a public space is fundamentally regressive and wrong.
The book details the fallout. Weinstein faced literal mob threats. Students roamed the campus with baseball bats. The police chief was told by the college president to stand down, and Weinstein eventually had to flee the campus for his own physical safety.
Riker notes that the college subsequently saw a massive, devastating drop in enrollment. She pairs this with the story of Lindsay Shepard at Wilfrid Laurier University in Canada.
Right. Shepard was a young teaching assistant who was dragged into a disciplinary tribunal by her advising professors.
Her crime. She simply showed her communications class a publicly broadcast clip of a televised debate featuring Jordan Peterson discussing gender pronouns.
She didn't endorse it, she just showed it to spark debate. The university secretly recorded her tribunal, where professors compared showing a Jordan Peterson clip to playing a speech by Adolf Hitler.
Roker uses these specific examples to frame modern universities not as educational institutions meant to explore diverse ideas, but as ideological lobotomy centers enforcing an intersectional dogma.
Let's break down what she means by that term. Intersectional dogma refers to the idea that all forms of perceived oppression, race, gender, class are linked, and that you must accept the entire ideological package without question.
If you question one aspect, like Weinstein or Shepard did, you are expelled from the community.
But the author doesn't just limit this Marxist feminist critique to North American college campuses. She takes it global.
The book argues that when socialist and Marxist regimes actually take power, they don't liberate women. Instead, feminism is used by the state to strip away women's freedom, turning them into what she graphically calls state-owned breeding stock and economic cogs.
She points to historical examples like East Germany during the Cold War. According to the text, the communist government utilized state-mandated abortion quotas.
They didn't view abortion as women's health care. They viewed it as a mechanism to force women back into the factory workforce immediately, preventing them from staying home to raise families, which the state viewed as economically unproductive.
She mentions Cuba, noting that feminist dissident Marta Beatriz Roque was jailed by the Castro regime for daring to criticize the government's horrific forced abortion quotas used to artificially lower the infant mortality rate.
The most detailed modern example she provides is Venezuela. Riker claims that under the socialist regimes of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, the government established a Ministry of Women that burned through massive, astronomical budgets.
The book states they spent $8 billion by 2013, supposedly on intersectional feminist programs. Meanwhile, 75% of the actual country was living in absolute grinding poverty.
She juxtaposes the extreme corruption of these programs with the stark reality on the ground. Riker highlights a ministry director allegedly spending $50,000 of public funds on a custom designer dress made in France.
She places that image directly next to the horrific reality of starving Venezuelan children who are reduced to breaking into zoos to eat flamingos and stray animals just to survive.
She uses this stark contrast to argue that feminist governance isn't actually about leadership or equality. She views it as a protection racket,
where ideological elites siphon off vast national resources, while average citizens, particularly the men who are forced into the black market to keep their families alive, are left to clean up the ruined infrastructure.
Which brings us perfectly to what she titles the Widowmaker welfare state. This is where she connects the economic theories back to the everyday taxpayer.
The author claims that average working men are essentially being taxed at exorbitant rates to fund their own demographic and societal replacement.
She brings out the math to support this claim. According to the book's statistics, for every $1 men pay into federal taxes, women collectively consume $1.50 in government benefits.
She traces the origin of this fiscal imbalance back to FDR's 1939 Social Security Act amendments.
Riker argues that this specific legislation fundamentally broke the social contract by allowing housewives, who may have never paid a single dime into the system, to claim full spousal benefits based entirely on their husband's labor.
Riker points out a massive demographic irony built into the system. Women currently retire, on average, at age 62, compared to men who retire at 69.
Yet statistically, women outlive men by an average of 5 years. This means men work longer, pay more into the system, die earlier, and extract far less.
while women work fewer years, contribute less to the tax base, and draw pensions for a significantly longer period of time.
She uses this data to reframe the entire concept of the welfare state. She doesn't view it as a compassionate safety net for the vulnerable.
She calls it a trampoline that actively incentivizes dysfunction, single motherhood, and the dissolution of the nuclear family.
She points to modern crowdfunding, claiming that 90% of GoFundMe campaigns are female-authored sob stories, arguing that modern culture has taught people that public victimhood pays significantly better than actual quiet labor.
She fundamentally believes that men produce the vast majority of the nation's tangible GDP, but have entirely lost control of how that wealth is distributed, leading to a parasitic system that loots male productivity to fund gynocentric state-sponsored policies.
The author is so committed to this economic critique that she even applies it to environmentalism in a very provocative chapter on ecofeminism.
She heavily mocks a recent feminist climate march in Berlin. According to the book, the marchers were protesting fossil fuels when the local power grid actually suffered a blackout.
Riker notes the immense poetic justice that the grid had to be manually restored by working-class men who drove out and fired up massive diesel generators, the exact technology the activists were protesting against.
She also takes direct aim at Greta Thunberg. When Thunberg made her famous, highly publicized zero-carbon voyage across the Atlantic in a racing yacht to speak at the UN, Riker points out the logistical reality that the media ignored.
It required 5 men to fly internationally on commercial, carbon-heavy jets just to sail the multi-million-dollar boat back to Europe.
Riker uses this to highlight the performative nature of ecofeminism, arguing that it relies on hidden male labor and infrastructure to maintain its illusions.
The actual policy critique in this chapter is centered on national energy grids. Riker claims that when Greenpeace, led by a female CEO, helped successfully lobby for the closure of Germany's last remaining perfectly functional nuclear power plants, it was a catastrophe.
The result wasn't a green utopia. It led to a massive 17% explosion in the burning of dirty coal just to keep the lights on during the winter.
She highlights an identical situation in California with the political push to close the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant.
Riker claims this closure forced the state to quietly import massive amounts of Saudi diesel fuel to run backup generators.
The book points to a resulting 12% spike in air pollution-related deaths in marginalized working-class communities living near the ports and power stations.
Her overarching conclusion to this chapter is that national power grids require logic, not lactation rooms.
She is arguing that feminist-driven environmental policy prioritizes emotional hashtags, optics, and anti-nuclear hysteria over the basic laws of physics and baseload power requirements.
As we move out of the economic arguments and into Section 4, the book shifts its focus to the massive cultural shifts happening right now in dating, demographics, and gender identity.
And the author goes incredibly hard on the topic of transgender activism. She titles this section the Transgender Trojan Horse.
The central claim she makes here is that legacy feminism actively and foolishly invited transgender activism into its ranks under the umbrella of intersectionality.
And now she argues that very same activism is systematically destroying dedicated women's spaces.
She uses the highly publicized example of Leah Thomas, the transgender swimmer who dominated biologically female competitors in the NCAA.
Riker notes how the female Olympians and college athletes who complained about the physical disparities were immediately silenced, bullied, and labeled bigots by the very feminist organizations that were founded to protect Title IX sports.
She backs up this cultural critique with alarming legal data. She points to a 2023 UK Ministry of Justice report stating that 60% of female inmates in the prison system report living in fear of physical or sexual attack from biologically male transgender prisoners who were transferred into female facilities.
The author tracks the ideological shift of massive organizations like the National Organization for Women.
She points out that NW went from aggressively endorsing biological lesbian rights in 1977 to declaring that trans women are women and pushing for their inclusion in all spaces by 2023.
And she highlights the profound irony of who is getting caught in the crossfire of this cultural shift. Old school, foundational feminist women who built the movement over decades are now the primary targets.
She points to J.K. Rowling as the prime example. Rowling is being viciously canceled, receiving death threats, and being ostracized by the exact progressive movement she helped build and fund, simply for defending sex-based biological realities and the necessity of single-sex spaces for vulnerable women.
Riker demands the immediate repeal of gender identity laws, portraying the entire movement as a medical and ideological grift that results in irreversible physical harm to children.
From the gender identity debate, the book makes a hard pivot to the biological consequences of modern culture, specifically examining the rise of surrogacy and the collapsing global birth rate.
Riker sharply criticizes the modern child-free culture and the booming IVF industry, which she claims has seen a massive 300% profit surge in recent years.
She zeroes in on celebrities, specifically singling out Kim Kardashian. Riker labels Kardashian's use of lower-income, working-class women as surrogates to carry her children as reproductive colonialism.
She paints a highly dystopian picture of wealthy, elite feminists who preach empowerment while essentially treating the wombs of working-class women like an Uber Eats delivery service.
Renting out their biology because pregnancy might inconvenience their brand or physical appearance.
This ties directly into her macro-level analysis of demographic data, which is genuinely alarming. She points to South Korea, a highly developed nation that is facing an existential demographic crisis with a dire 0.78 fertility rate.
To explain why South Korea is facing this collapse, she looks at the men. According to the book, 83% of young Korean men now view marriage as literal financial suicide.
They are refusing to propose or start families because they deeply fear that biased, feminist-leaning divorce courts will inevitably strip them of their assets, their homes, and their future income.
On the flip side of this collapse, the author praises nations attempting to reverse the trend. She highlights Hungary's aggressively pro-family policies.
She notes that the Hungarian government began offering massive mortgage breaks and absolute income tax exemptions for women who have multiple children.
According to the book, treating the nuclear family as a vital national resource rather than a patriarchal trap resulted in a 25% jump in birth rates.
She contrasts this traditional state-supported family building with Western child-free influencers, arguing that civilizations are built and maintained by parents raising future taxpayers and warriors.
Not by perpetual adolescents hoarding rescue pets and posting complaining videos on TikTok.
And this demographic collapse she's outlining is deeply, inextricably tied to her critique of modern dating. She frames the modern sexual marketplace entirely through the lens of OnlyFans, dating apps, and hookup culture.
Riker explicitly describes Tinder not as a dating tool, but as Darwin's Hunger Games.
The statistics she provides to back up this claim are brutal. She cites user data claiming that women on Tinder swipe right on only 4.5% of the male profiles they see.
This hyperselectivity creates a deeply skewed sexual economy where a tiny fraction of top-tier men have access to almost all the women.
While the vast majority of average working-class men are completely and totally left out of the dating market.
She then explores where all of that male attention and frustration goes. It goes to digital platforms.
She explores the economics of OnlyFans, noting that it mirrors the worst aspects of hypercapitalism. The top 1% of female creators on the platform vacuum up 80% of the total revenue.
And who is funding this multi-billion-dollar economy? Riker claims it is heavily funded by lonely working-class men earning under $50,000 a year.
She gives a stunning, specific example to illustrate this tragedy. She brings up the massive Twitch and OnlyFans creator known as Amaranth, who reportedly makes upwards of $1.5 million a month.
Riker points out that at one point, Amaranth's top financial patron was a 42-year-old unmarried IT worker who blew his entire $15,000 annual corporate bonus just to buy digital tokens for her.
Essentially funding the luxurious lifestyle of a multimillionaire who will never know his name.
But importantly, the author doesn't just blame the men for being pathetic. She viciously attacks the feminist sex work is work narrative that enables this dynamic.
The book claims that internal industry data shows 94% of women in the sex trade actually want to quit but feel economically trapped.
Riker mocks lifestyle magazines like Cosmopolitan for publishing articles promoting casual hookup culture and empowering sex work,
while simultaneously ignoring the fact that young women are being prescribed record historical numbers of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications.
So what is Riker's solution to this hypersexualized dystopian marketplace? It's a return to traditional chastity.
But she frames it differently. She profiles a 28-year-old accountant named Maria, who is part of a growing, quiet trend of campus peer pressure groups.
These are young women actively rejecting hookup culture entirely.
Riker argues that in the modern context, chastity isn't a form of patriarchal religious oppression. She frames it as a ruthless, pragmatic, and highly effective biological strategy.
The logic goes like this. By completely opting out of the casual transactional sexual marketplace, women retain all of their leverage.
If casual sex is off the table, it forces men to actually grow up, build their careers, improve their character, and commit to marriage if they want a relationship.
She claims that data shows couples who remain chaste before marriage report 30% higher marital satisfaction rates.
Simply because there is no emotional baggage, no history of betrayal, and no constant comparisons to past casual partners.
Which brings us to the author's analysis of how men are reacting to this entirely rigged system. Because according to Riker, men aren't just taking it, they are actively, quietly opting out.
The book details the global rise of MGTOW. Let's define that men going their own way.
It's a decentralized philosophy where men decide to completely boycott marriage, cohabitation, and often even casual dating, focusing entirely on their own financial independence and hobbies.
The author points to Japan as the canary in the coal mine for this movement. She details the phenomenon of Japan's herbivore men.
The book notes a staggering, almost unbelievable statistic. 64% of Japanese men under the age of 30 refuse to engage in the dating market in any capacity.
They have no interest in marriage, no interest in sex, and no interest in climbing the corporate ladder to provide for a family.
Riker argues that these men are not defective. They are acting completely rationally. They have run the cost-benefit analysis of modern relationships, looked at the legal and financial risks, and simply chosen to leave the casino.
She illustrates this cultural withdrawal with a very specific, viral internet moment. You know the exact GIF I'm talking about? Homer Simpson slowly backing into the bushes until he disappears.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the most universally recognizable memes on the internet.
Right, but she uses this meme to illustrate a massive, serious demographic cliff. She describes a TikTok influencer named Emily Van Kunt, who posted a video sincerely asking her camera, "Where have all the good men gone?"
Riker notes that the video received tens of thousands of replies from men, and the vast majority of them simply posted that GIF of Homer Simpson backing away into the hedge.
The author argues that feminism spent 60 years marching, protesting, and telling men that they were obsolete, that a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
And now, she argues, men are simply saying, message received, mission accomplished.
They are retreating into cryptocurrency portfolios, massive multiplayer video games, and alternative, self-contained lifestyles, rather than risking devastating divorce rate or false Title IX allegations.
So if this mass exodus of men is happening, why isn't it front page news? Section 5 of the book looks at the infrastructure maintaining this cultural divide, what she calls the gynocentric media complex.
The author makes the sweeping, systemic claim that the legacy media is entirely complicit in pushing and protecting the feminist narrative while bearing the consequences.
She brings data to this accusation. She states that 91% of working journalists in legacy media institutions donate exclusively to the Democratic Party.
She argues that this lack of political diversity turns modern journalism into nothing more than progressive activism with a byline.
To highlight this ideological enforcement, she cites an anecdote about an NPR intern who was allegedly fired from the organization simply for stating in an internal meeting that the Hunter Biden laptop story appeared credible and should be investigated.
Well before the broader media admitted it was real.
She also takes aim at Hollywood and the entertainment industry's portrayal of men over the last 3 decades. Think about the classic sitcoms.
Riker argues that modern media constantly, relentlessly portrays sitcom dads and husbands as bumbling, incompetent idiots. She specifically names Homer Simpson, or Phil Dunphy, from Modern Family.
The fathers are always portrayed as overgrown children who need to be managed, while the mothers are depicted as flawless, hyper-competent saints constantly rolling their eyes at male incompetence.
She argues this isn't just comedy, it's a deliberate psychological conditioning of the culture to view masculinity as inherently defective.
And she attacks the legacy media's handling of serious legal issues, specifically the Me Too movement. She claims that the media operates on a massive double standard.
She points to the high-profile defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Riker argues that papers like the New York Times buried Johnny Depp's massive cache of audio and video evidence proving his innocence on page 16.
While keeping unverified, believe all women narratives and op-eds splashed across the front page for months.
But the author sees the tide turning. She doesn't end the book on a note of defeat. This is where she believes the masculinist counterculture is actively winning the war.
The book points to the massive, undeniable success of alternative media platforms. She highlights Joe Rogan's Spotify podcast.
Rogan boasts 11 million loyal listeners per episode. They tune in for long-form, raw, unfiltered conversations that the legacy media constantly labels toxic or dangerous.
She also highlights the absolute dominance of anti-woke and heterodox newsletters on Substack, where journalists who are pushed out of mainstream newsrooms are making millions directly from readers.
She points out that Tucker Carlson's videos, published directly on Twitter after his firing from Fox News, routinely hit over 100 million views.
Completely eclipsing primetime cable news ratings.
Riker uses a really fascinating granular retail metric to illustrate this cultural shift away from legacy media. She claims that in the year 2022, the conservative media outlet The Daily Wire sold more facts over Feelings branded coffee mugs than CNN sold branded tote bags globally.
Her point in bringing up merchandise sales is that men are starved for unapologetic reality. They are desperate for content that doesn't constantly berate them.
And they are highly willing to open their wallets and fund alternative media ecosystems, platforms like Rumble, Telegram, X, and Substack, to completely bypass the traditional feminist-filtered gatekeepers.
And this all culminates in the final concluding chapter of the book, which she titles The Masculinist Manifesto.
This chapter drops the sociological analysis and serves as a direct, actionable playbook for the reader. Riker outlines a strict philosophy that she calls tradcon maximalism.
Let's define what she actually means by that. Tradcon is internet shorthand for traditional conservative, referring to a desire for classic gender roles and family structures.
But she attaches maximalism to it to suggest a highly aggressive, uncompromising application of these values.
Her demands for the men reading the book are incredibly clear: stop playing a rigged game. She urges men to obsessively build their own value.
She tells them to lift weights, focus on physical sovereignty, build localized businesses, and quietly amass hard resources.
Above all, she tells them to completely, utterly ignore feminist narratives, media hit pieces, and the endless complaints of activists.
The directives she gives are highly specific and uncompromising. She tells men to demand mandatory paternity tests without apology.
She tells them to absolutely reject modern marriages or cohabitation setups that treat the man like a walking ATM or a secondary citizen in his own home.
She urges fathers to actively teach young boys to honor their masculine instincts, competition, aggression, stoicism, rather than constantly apologizing for them or pathologizing them as toxic.
She even ties this philosophy into finance. She advocates for adopting Bitcoin and decentralized finance.
Why? Because she argues it is the only way to bypass fiat currency systems and central banks that tax male labor to fund what she calls gender pork projects and massive welfare states.
Ultimately, her final message is one of economic starvation. She is telling men to stop financially, physically, and emotionally funding their own demise, and to simply let the gynocentric system collapse under its own unsustainable weight.
It is a massive, incredibly dense scope of claims. If you trace the architecture of what we've covered today, she attempts to revise the history of the suffragettes as violent terrorists.
She frames modern abortion as a corporate eugenics hustle.
We've looked at her intense attacks on the divorce courts, the Title IX tribunals, her critique of eco-feminist climate policy, and the massive demographic collapse fueled by OnlyFans and the hyper-selective Tinder economy.
The author has meticulously constructed a cohesive worldview where every single modern institution, from the hospital you were born in to the university you attend to the media you consume, is completely compromised by an ideology hostile to men.
And within that constructive worldview, she argues that the only rational, mathematically sound response for a man is to adopt tradcon maximalism, prioritize absolute self-reliance, and quietly, permanently withdraw his participation from the systems that vilify him.
Which leaves us with a final, overarching question to ponder, inspired directly by the architecture of the source material.
We've discussed the data on Japanese herbivores and the rise of men going their own way. If the author is fundamentally correct that massive portions of the male population are quietly opting out of dating, marriage, and traditional societal participation, what happens next?
What happens to the very physical infrastructure and complex institutions of a society when the people who are historically expected to build, fund, and maintain them simply walk away and refuse to participate?
It's a profound structural question. If the folks maintaining the high-voltage power grids, the water purification systems, the deep-sea oil rigs, and the heavy industry decide that the social contract is irreparably broken, the implications for the survival of the civilization are massive.
It is certainly something for you to mull over as you look at the current cultural shifts.
Absolutely. As a reminder, our strict goal today was to impartially report on the contents of this highly polarized text, acting solely as your guides to unpack the mechanics of the author's arguments.
We presented the claims exactly as they appear in the text.
If you want to explore the source material and judge its claims for yourself, check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy Critical Cringe, and be sure to follow the author at Conrad and Riker on Substack.
Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the show so we can keep diving deep into the massive, complicated texts shaping our world.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening.